Once again, would like to lead off today's video by saying a big thank you to everyone who shows up here on a daily basis and engages with the content and leaves comments. The YouTube audience I have here is the best on the internet, bar none. Those of you who have signed up over the Patreon channel, the difference that you're making in my life is truly humbling, and I appreciate it greatly. Those of you that would have the ability to, it's only $1 per month. There are no levels. It's even less if you sign up for an entire year. And the content over there is, well, a little bit more intense, a little bit more adult. But in these days, in these times, I think it's important that people have the hard conversations. And once again, if it's not for you, fully refundable, all the way up to 90 days. So nothing lost. We talk primarily about psychological operations, which basically is the idea of identifying our own psychological misgivings and also perhaps those in others, and using that knowledge to make our life better. Now, I would like to start off today with an analogy that we used yesterday, but also add in some different information. We've been talking about for quite a long time the coming grid down, power down scenario, no internet. How are people going to relate to each other differently? It's truly, to my mind, not going to be about how many pounds of rice or how many pounds of beans you have, or truly even how many rounds of ammo or any other stockpile. It's going to be about people and how you relate to them. One of the people out there that I've shared, he's here on YouTube, Southern Prepper 1, some time ago put up a video talking about a new law in South Carolina where all you had to do is go out and paint purple paint on your boundary lines instead of putting up, like, say, a fence, to let people know that it was private property. That's all you had to do, is go out and a certain height, a certain color shade, a certain amount, and it would equal, in law, no trespassing. Now, that in law thing is, of course, the term de jure, meaning D-E space J-U-R-E. In law, this would be the case. But in reality, grid down, power down scenario, an adult might know this, but a kid might not. He might think, well, maybe they just have it marked to cut down. He might not know, he or she. Now, I've shared this image before too on my property. One of the reasons I put up this fence is because it is an unmistakable physical representation of where one property line ends and one begins. You see, this is a de facto boundary, meaning that in law, if someone were to climb up on top of it and peek over, they would be committing a crime. But if someone were, let's say this fence wasn't here for a minute, and someone were standing here on this property, and they had the right to be, and they were looking over at this property, there would be no crime committed. See, climbing up on a fence and looking over, that's a crime. See, there's no expectation of privacy without a fence. There's no legal expectation of privacy without a fence. Now, I've shown this image, I believe, once or twice before, and for me, the reason this is the case is that if I were to have perhaps young ladies over that were in varying states of dress because of the swimming pool, I would want them to have an expectation of privacy. In this area across the back here, those of you who are wondering, since the time of this picture being taken, this has all been completely fenced in with brand new fencing. So there's only one small tiny area way over here in the corner where you can kind of walk through, but you can't see through. And to me, that's a different idea than most people would have about grid down, power down. Many people say, well, if it's my property and somebody's on it, I'm just going to go ahead and get a side picture and end them. That can't possibly be the answer for every single case of trespassing. You see, without civil courts, without criminal courts, there's going to have to be people out there who have good judgment. People out there that know how to assess different situations based on their merits. That's why I believe it's very, very important, if you're going to have a survival group, and you're going to be at one property, that you have these hard conversations and you talk about things and you war game things. The analogy that we used yesterday about the young ones that were without parents. It's a grid down, power down, end of the world situation. And there are these young boys that we had talked about that had come onto the property and they had helped themselves to some supplies that were unsecured apparently. And you noticed this during an inventory. And you wondered, where did this stuff go? And then, of course, now here's where my analogy broke down. Here's where this is my fault. This is where I didn't do the analogy properly. There's a female in your group, and she says, I've been getting this weird sense that somebody's been looking through the blinds or looking through the window at me. And many people pushed back and said, well, why don't you just close the blinds? Why don't you just pull the curtains? Or, do something that's basically the idea here was blame the victim. So I've cleaned the analogy up a little bit, and this actually makes it a little bit more believable. Let's say in that particular case that because, of course, it's grid down, power down, you have no hot water inside, you've had to create something like this outside. And this is where all bathing has to take place. Now, I've actually considered making one of these for my property in reality, simply because this would also be a great decontamination station. And, once again, the idea morale-wise of being able to bathe and have a hot shower and one solar panel and one tank, could be a huge survival asset. But let's just say this is the case instead. Instead of the female in your group coming to you and saying they're peeking through the window, she's out there taking a bath, cleaning up, and she could swear that she heard giggling or she saw little feet underneath here or whatever. And could something be done? So you and maybe the senior female leader of your group get together and you put the shower on, you have them go out there and you kind of keep an eye on things, and lo and behold, this is correct. There are some young boys that are on the property, around the property, doing things they shouldn't be doing. Now, what do you do? So you've noticed that, yes, they've trespassed, they've taken supplies, they have things they shouldn't have, but once again, they're just kids. What do you do? It's a very difficult discussion. I had made the analogy that you would go out and you would round them up and bring them back. Well, what if then there's the female leader of your group who wants there to be a certain punishment meted out? If they're going to stay and they're going to be primarily in her care, which, by the way, would more than likely be the case, if you had a large group, survival group, you'd have guys that went out and did their thing, and you would have, women at home, and they would be doing their thing, and that would largely probably deal with the kids. She would probably want to establish some level of respect and accountability. Now, some pushed back on this and said, oh, that would be kind of overkill. Even if it were or it weren't, it would still probably be the best move to let her make that decision. Because if she's going to be the one, like I said, in charge of this while you're out foraging, you're out doing what men do, there's going to have to be an understanding that they know she's in charge. And, this is the way things were done a long time ago. I've had this exact same conversation with this analogy with some people in my life that are far older than I am, and they've said, yeah, of course. Absolutely. It wouldn't even necessarily be about the groceries, or it wouldn't even be about the whole peeping Tom thing. It would be about establishing authority. And that seems pretty cut and dried and straightforward to me, because I know at my age, that way back then, if I had been 8 or 9 years old and been caught doing something like that, that would have been the answer. You see, people pine for the good old days. People talk about nostalgia and, if things were only like they were back whenever. Sometimes they forget some things. Sometimes they forget certain aspects of life. You see, you can have grace and mercy and forgiveness, but you can also demand personal accountability so that you teach mindfulness, acceptance, honesty, and courage, which is, of course, what you would want to instill in those young people. You know, they didn't necessarily know better than what they were doing, but this would also be a good moment to reassure the females in your group that you valued their desire for privacy, their expectation of privacy, and that you also respected the fact that they had a certain level of authority over the survival group. It would be a good move one way or the other. However you look at it, however you want to look at it. Now, funny story, there's another place in the world where this would not even be a question. Latin America. See, they have absolutely no problem down there with corporal punishment. It happens all the time. You know, even though in Colombia, technically they have a law that outlaws it, it happens all the time. And there's a reason. There's a reason I used this image before, is because down there, it's a very hard thing for North Americans to wrap their head around. One of the reasons that this is so prevalent in Colombia and other Latin American nations, but primarily that is because they don't want these women who are engaging in prostitution, do not want their kids growing up on the street, because that's their other option. They don't want their kids growing up on the street. And that happens to a lot of them. And they get involved with the cartels and with drugs. And if it's a choice between your kids living a horrific existence like this, or you doing this, it's not even a choice. That's why 30% of women, females, I guess, age 10 to 50, roughly that group of women, 30% of them have at one point in their life had to pay the bills doing this. See, this is one of those very difficult conversations that needs to be had. What would you do to prevent that? What would you do to make sure at all costs nothing like that happened? I mean, if it meant this, you'd actually be doing them a favor. At that age, you would be doing them a favor. Now, funny story. I'm sure a lot of you are looking at these images going, these are from Colony. Well, number one, it's a fantastic series to watch if you want information about survival and what you may or may not face. But in this story, believe it or not, we've talked about a lot of aspects of it. They have a kid, a young kid, about this age, who, because of when the aliens arrived, they dropped down the walls. He was on the wrong side of the wall. The entire first season is dedicated to their attempts to getting him back. Well, he finally does. The father finally gets over to the other side of the wall and finds him. And he has to go then climb down the other side of the wall to retrieve him. And his wife is absolutely over the moon. Her family's back together again. And of course, they cut his hair and they bathe and he has food and all this. But they realize something real quick, that he ain't the kid that they knew even a year ago. He's a straight up street kid and he knows how to survive. And it gets pretty ugly. It really does. It gets, the kid does some good things to help protect his sister, but he also is a thief and a manipulator and all of this, and they learn this stuff very quickly. 4 pillars of survival. Fitness, we've talked about. Attitude is pure psychology. Training, we've talked about, like with Tim Bassett. And equipment, there are so many channels out there on YouTube that their entire plan for survival is nothing but equipment. Buy this, get this, do this. And that's their entire plan. There's a few more out there that talk about survival fitness. That's true. And some, like the Patriot Nurse, for example, she talks about weapons training. There's lots of different kinds, but very few, if any, talk about survival psychology other than in the most platonic of terms, meaning keep a good attitude, have hope. They don't get down into the nuts and bolts of it. And that's what we do here. And it's why we do it. Because once the power goes out, once the grid goes down, and all the little black mirror distractions go away, it's going to be about people. And it's going to be about decisions. And there's going to be no courts to go run to mediate this. So maybe take a chapter, and this is just my humble opinion here, take it for what it is, especially you guys out there. In this particular scenario that I laid out today, it would be very easy for guys to dismiss that activity as well. Boys will be boys. See, that's not the message you want to send. That's not the message, even if that's what you believe. That's not the message you want to send. It cannot be a total top-down dictatorship. There has to be some level of parity, some level of shared authority. Otherwise, you're just creating what brought us to this point to begin with. Do what they would do. If you don't believe me, ask somebody in your life that's over 70 years old. Lay out the entire scenario and see what they say. This level of wisdom can't be bought. And I'll leave it there. God bless. Like, share, subscribe. Would love to have you over at the Patreon channel where we can talk about this in a little more stark terms. And that's just the truth. $1 US. That's it per month. And like I said, even less if you sign up for an entire year, fully refundable, lowest allowable level. God bless. Have a great day. Like, share, subscribe. We'll see you guys next time.